Chaos erupted in Ahmedabad city, shattering the calm of an ordinary morning and sending shockwaves through the community. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, thick black smoke billowed into the sky, a grim signal that something had gone terribly wrong. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, once a symbol of hope and technological progress, crashed just miles from the runway. The wreckage sprawled across an open field, a haunting landscape of twisted metal and shattered dreams, marking the site of an unimaginable tragedy. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, battling flames and searching desperately for survivors. But the devastation was absolute. 270 lives lost in an instant, leaving behind only silence and heartbreak. There were no survivors, only questions and grief. As the world watched in disbelief and mourned the victims, a former Boeing quality engineer stepped forward. He released a statement that would change everything, claiming the crash was no mere accident, but the result of deeper issues. The engineer alleged that the 787 program was plagued by deep systemic flaws, problems he had reported for years, only to be ignored or dismissed by the company. His warnings, he said, had fallen on deaf ears. The whistleblower accused Boeing of putting speed and profit ahead of safety, sparking outrage and igniting a global firestorm. The world demanded answers, and the aviation industry was thrust into the spotlight. Investigators from India and the US began the painstaking process of recovering the black boxes, combing through the wreckage for clues. Every piece of debris, every data point, became vital in the search for the truth. But according to the whistleblower, the real story was hidden deeper, buried in confidential corporate records, overlooked safety reports, and the daily routines of factory floors. The answers, he insisted, were there for those willing to look. The Dreamliner, once celebrated as the future of aviation and a marvel of engineering, now stood at the center of a global nightmare, its reputation in ruins. The crash exposed a troubling pattern of overlooked issues, missed warnings, and raised urgent questions about the safety of one of the world's most advanced airliners. Experts pored over every detail, searching for what had been missed. Families gathered in grief, united by loss and demanding to know why this tragedy had happened. Their pain echoed around the world, fueling calls for accountability and change. The tragedy forced the world to confront uncomfortable truths about the cost of innovation, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and the risks of cutting corners in pursuit of progress. The Dreamliner's promise of comfort, efficiency, and safety was shattered in a single moment, replaced by fear, doubt, and a sense of betrayal that lingered in every empty seat. The incident became a symbol of a crisis simmering beneath the surface of the aviation industry, a warning that no one could afford to ignore. The world was left to wonder how many warnings had been missed, how many red flags ignored, before disaster finally struck, and what would it take to ensure it never happened again. The whistleblower was no stranger to Boeing or federal investigators. He'd worked on the 787 line in South Carolina, documenting safety violations and filing complaints with the FAA. His claims, parts installed incorrectly, debris left inside planes, and relentless pressure to meet quotas, regardless of defects. Boeing painted him as a disgruntled employee, casting doubt on his motives. But his warnings pointed to a deeper problem, a culture where production speed trumps safety. Workers feared retaliation for speaking up, and quality was sacrificed for deadlines. Federal prosecutors took his testimony seriously, making it central to their investigation. The Ahmedabad crash turned his allegations from corporate dispute to urgent public safety crisis. Suddenly his warnings were tragically real, potentially linked to 270 deaths. The world could no longer ignore the messenger or the message. The Dreamliner's troubles began long before Ahmedabad. Minor technical issues, electrical malfunctions, battery fires, software bugs, were dismissed as growing pains. But these small problems signaled deeper flaws in design and manufacturing. Boeing's global outsourcing model saved money but made quality control nearly impossible. Fuselage sections didn't fit, workers used shims to fill gaps, sometimes improperly, creating hidden stress points. These imperfections, misaligned parts, faulty batteries, software glitches, were symptoms of a system under strain. Each fix was treated in isolation, masking a pattern of systemic risk. The Dreamliner's small flaws were warnings of a much larger crisis. Technical records revealed critical flaws Boeing knew about but never fully resolved. The ram air turbine, a last resort emergency device, was prone to failure in certain conditions, potentially leaving pilots powerless. The aft pressure bulkhead, built with substandard materials, risked catastrophic decompression at altitude. Water leaks in the electronics bays caused short circuits and instrument failures, a design flaw never fully fixed. Substandard and counterfeit parts, weak titanium components, and incorrectly installed fasteners compounded the risks. These weren't isolated glitches, they were fundamental defects in the Dreamliner's most vital systems. Each flaw increased the chance of disaster. The combination of these failures created a cascade of risk for every flight. The Dreamliner's safety was compromised long before it left the ground. The Dreamliner's hidden flaws became terrifyingly real in the skies. A LATAM 787 plunged mid-flight after a known seat design issue triggered a violent dive, injuring dozens. Other flights saw autopilot failures, erratic controls, and pilots fighting to keep the plane stable. Water leaks shorted out electronics, forcing crews to land with backup instruments. Each incident eroded pilot confidence and exposed dangerous vulnerabilities. These weren't rare flukes, they were the direct result of ignored warnings and flawed design. For every headline, countless near misses were quietly logged. The lucky landed safely, the Ahmedabad victims did not. The tragedy proved what experts feared: hidden risks can and do end in catastrophe. The Dreamliner's promise was undone by its own overlooked dangers. Boeing's problems began with a profound cultural shift that took root after its merger with McDonnell Douglas. What was once a company driven by engineering excellence and a deep commitment to safety started to change from within. Leadership began to prioritize profits and stock price above all else, sidelining the voices of engineers and those who had built Boeing's reputation for quality. The focus shifted from building the safest planes to maximizing shareholder returns. The power center moved away from Seattle's legendary engineers and into the hands of Chicago's corporate executives, who were often far removed from the factory floor and the realities of aircraft production. On the factory floor, especially in the newer South Carolina plant, relentless pressure to meet production quotas became the norm. Workers were expected to deliver more, faster, often at the expense of careful craftsmanship. Employees were told to push planes through the assembly line, even if it meant using out-of-spec parts or leaving debris inside the aircraft. Corners were cut, and shortcuts became routine. Raising safety concerns became a career risk. Those who spoke up were often ignored or even punished. Dissent was not just discouraged, it was actively suppressed. Instead of addressing root problems, management favored quick fixes. Quality checks devolved into mere box-ticking exercises with little regard for actual safety or reliability. Whistleblowers who tried to sound the alarm were silenced or marginalized as the company's focus shifted to maintaining appearances rather than solving real issues. This toxic culture of compromise and denial led directly to the Dreamliner's flaws, problems that were not just technical but deeply rooted in the company's new priorities. The technical failures were symptoms of a deeper rot, a company that had lost sight of its core values, trading its legacy of safety and innovation for short-term gains. The true cost of this shift was measured not just in dollars, but in lives lost and public trust destroyed, consequences that would haunt Boeing for years to come. Boeing's crisis put the FAA under the microscope. The agency had delegated much of its oversight to Boeing, trusting the company to police itself. But the Dreamliner and 737 MAX disasters shattered that trust. The FAA was slow to act, often accepting Boeing's reassurances despite mounting evidence of problems. Now, regulators are reclaiming authority, placing inspectors on factory floors and ending self-certification. Airlines too have lost faith, sending their own teams to inspect new planes before delivery. This unprecedented scrutiny signals a deep crisis of confidence. The old model of trust and delegation is broken. Regulators and airlines are now the last line of defense for passenger safety. The system's very foundation has been shaken. The Ahmedabad wreckage stands as a haunting symbol, a stark reminder of a crisis of trust that now stretches across the entire aviation industry, shaking the very foundation of how we view air travel. The Dreamliner, once celebrated as a marvel of modern engineering and innovation, now stands for broken promises, lost confidence, and the heavy cost of corporate missteps. Boeing's challenge today is not just technical, it's deeply cultural and ethical, requiring a fundamental shift in values and priorities within the company. True reform means empowering employees at every level, prioritizing safety above all else, and embracing real independent oversight that cannot be ignored or bypassed. The failures at Boeing have exposed global regulatory weaknesses, prompting a worldwide shift towards stricter, more cautious, and often slower certification processes. The era of easy trust is over. Skepticism and rigorous verification are now the new norm, as every step in aviation is scrutinized more closely than ever before. Yet, hundreds of Dreamliners still fly every day, carrying millions of passengers across the globe, even as many of the underlying systemic issues remain unresolved and unaddressed. Until Boeing can truly prove it has changed, every 787 flight carries a shadow of doubt, leaving passengers and crew to wonder if safety is truly being put first. The world waits for real accountability, demanding answers, demanding change, and quietly fears what might happen if that accountability never comes. The question is no longer if another tragedy will occur, but when, and whether we will be ready to prevent it, or simply forced to react once again.